Okay, in our next section, we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing fractions. And before we get into the actual steps for multiplying and dividing fractions, we need to do a quick review of just multiplication and division. So topic one is using properties to find products and quotients, okay? So we have definitions, properties, and then we'll eventually get to a little bit of practice. Then we'll start talking about fractions. So the first two definitions come up in the name of this topic. So we have products and quotients. What are those? So the answer to a multiplication problem is called a product, and the answer to a division problem is called a quotient. So you do need to remember that because a lot of times we'll have directions that say something like find each quotient or find each product. You need to know what that means, okay? Now we have some properties. We've talked about all of these properties at some point in the past. We're just reviewing them, so we're going to go through it fairly quickly. Okay, it is important, even though these properties are easy to use, it's important to understand the name and what the property does. Okay, so first up, we have the multiplication property of zero. This property simply tells us that if we have a product of any number in zero, that the product is going to be zero. So if you have any number times zero, the product is zero, okay? So no matter what, any number, if you multiply it by zero, you're going to get zero. We then have the multiplication property of one, and the multiplication property of one says the product of any number and one is just that number. So regardless of what the number is, positive, negative, big, small, fraction, decimal, integer, whole number, doesn't matter. Whatever that number is, if I multiply it by one, I just get that number right back, okay? And we actually use this property quite a bit when we're talking about fractions, especially when we start talking about adding and subtracting, okay? So this multiplication property of one, we use it in kind of a secret way, but it's really powerful for us. Next, we have the division properties of one. So there are two of them. The division properties of one first state the quotient of any number and one is that number. So for this one right here, no matter what number you choose, if you were to divide it by one, you just get that number right back. Okay. The second property of, well, the second property with division in one is the quotient of any number and itself is one. So regardless of what the number is, if I take that number and I divide it by itself, I get one. This also comes up quite a bit when we're talking about adding and subtracting fractions. We use what some instructors will call a well-chosen one, which is just really take some number divided by itself, you get a value that equals one. And then if you multiply by that value, while it may change the appearance of your fraction, it's not changing the value of your fraction. So this is really important, knowing that no matter what, if you take something and divide it by itself, you just get one. Okay. Now, the two properties that probably give students the most grief, my dog's going to start barking. I can tell she just came tearing out. Sorry. Anyway, the property that probably gives students the most issues is the division properties of zero. There she goes. Hopefully this won't last long. Anyway, the first property says the quotient of zero in any number is zero. Okay. The second property is the one that throws people. It says the quotient of any number and zero is undefined. So you can take zero and divide it by a number. That's okay. You cannot take a number and divide it by zero. So a lot of times I'll tell students to remember these in this regard. If you take zero and you divide it by some number k, that's okay. Okay. You just get a quotient of zero. However, if you take a number and divide it by zero, think of that as no way. This is the one that doesn't work. So think, okay, that one's good, it equals zero. And then if your fraction spells no, where the divisor is zero, that's the one that doesn't work. That one we would say is just undefined. So think okay and no way when it comes to division of fractions. So think of your division, or not division of fractions, but division with zero rather. When you set up your division as a fraction, if zero is the numerator, that one's okay. If zero is the denominator, that one doesn't work. And then finally, a quick review of signs. When you're bless my heart, when you're multiplying and dividing, we have two rules that work for signs, and they work the same way for multiplication and division. If you're multiplying or dividing numbers that have the same sign, both positive or both negative, your product or quotient is always going to be positive. So if you have, I was about to put a multiplication symbol there. If you have two positives or two negatives with multiplication or division, this works for both, your product or quotient will always be positive. The other one says if you're multiplying or dividing two numbers with different signs, obviously that would mean one's positive, one's negative, that's always going to give you a negative quotient. So you do need to remember that. And again, we've talked about all of this stuff so far, so we're going through it just kind of quickly. Now, for example 1, we have find each product or quotient, okay? So this is all about just using those properties, okay? So first we have 1/3 times 0. Well, this is the multiplication property of 0. You take any number, it doesn't matter if it's a fraction or an integer, you multiply it by 0, your product is always going to be 0, okay? Next, we have 1/3 times 1. Again, regardless of what your number is to start with, if you take any number and multiply it by 1, you just get that number right back. So 1/3 times 1 is equal to just 1/3. All right. Next, for part C, we have 1/3 divided by 1. So this is one of the division properties of 1. And we state that regardless of the number, you could take any number, and if you divide it by 1, you just get that number back. So 1/3 divided by 1 is 1/3. Next, we have 1/3 divided by 1/3. So for part D, we have some number, 1/3, divided by exactly itself, and that's the other division property of 1. We say that if you take any number, divide it by itself, you always get a quotient of 1, okay? Now, for part E and F, these are the two, again, that most students have the big issues with. So we have some number, 1/3, divided by 0. So if I think of that 1/3 as a numerator, some number in the numerator, divided by 0, this is the one that we could say looks like, no, this one doesn't work. You cannot divide by 0. We have to come and say that 1/3 divided by 0 is undefined. And it kind of makes sense if you really sit down and think about it. You can't break a number into 0 groups. Best case scenario, you have at least one group. You can't say, oh, I have this 1/3, I want to split it into 0 groups. That just doesn't make sense. Okay, finally, for part F, we have 0 divided by 1/3. Here we have a numerator of 0, and then we have a denominator that's some number, in this case 1/3. So this one looks like, okay, so this one's good to go. We can take 0 and divide it by a number. So this one right here is 0, okay? So those are the different properties that you will for sure see come up with multiplication and division. Make sure you understand each of them. Make sure you understand them kind of written out in words like what we had up here, and then make sure you also understand how they work in practice, okay? Next videos, we'll actually get into the multiplying and dividing of fractions.